Joining me in the studio and on Zoom today, we have several guests. So we have Alison Conemac, who is the Safe Environment Director. Mm-hmm. Do I say it? Is that right? I don't know. As soon as I said your name, I was like, I did not recheck her title to make sure.
I think coordinator is technically.
Coordinator. That's right. Yeah. That's right. So she's the Safe Environment Coordinator for the Diocese of Sioux Falls. Welcome, Alison.
Thank you.
And on Zoom, we have with us Mike and Tammy Mitzel, way up in Aberdeen. Thanks for joining us, you guys. So we're going to talk about boundaries today. And that sounds very general. But we're going to talk about boundaries in the context of good and bad boundaries. Why do we have boundaries? Different things. So this is going to be great. I promise.
Me too.
So I'm just going to start with a little bit with Alison. If you'll just tell us a little bit about yourself, and then I'll have Mike and Tammy tell us a little bit about themselves too, and why we might have them here to talk about this.
Wonderful. Well, I'm Alison Conemac. I grew up in a very big family, 8 kids in my family on the West Coast, but I have family out here in the Midwest. And so I've made my home here, and I love serving the ministry of the Safe Environment Office in our diocese. I've served in different ministry roles, almost every ministry role in parish life. And so, I just really appreciate I appreciate the work that I have here. Yeah. And I love working and living in this diocese.
Yeah. Allison has a great passion for the safe environment.
Absolutely.
Stuff. She's like the perfect person for this kind of work.
Oh,
I feel
awesome.
like.
Thank you.
Okay. So Mike and Tammy, will you tell us a little bit about yourselves, please?
Yeah. Mike and Tammy Mitzel. We've lived in Aberdeen for most of our life. Been a little bit here and there. Background for me, where this is kind of near and dear to me is I spent a lot of years as a counselor, working in treatment centers, working with youth and families. So this is near and dear to me. And we also have a large family. We had 8 children.
Wow.
A chunk of those are still in the home. Some are married and we have grandkids too. So
wow.
Important topic for me anyway.
This is why you're so busy. Kids and
that
grandkids.
Would do it, yes.
Still Tammy, how about you?
Well, yeah, I was a teacher in a classroom for 3 years, and then worked in the government, then did daycare, and just been raising kids and homeschooling. And my youngest is 7 and very affectionate, and so spent a little more time with him on boundaries because of that. So
that's very true. Yeah. How old is your oldest?
26.
Oh wow. Okay. So you've actually got them pretty spread out for 8. Is that good, do you think? Or do you wish you'd had them a little closer together?
Well, a lot of them were close.
Okay.
And when we got married, Mike wanted to have them close. And I see that as a great advantage because they have built-in playmates.
Right. They can keep each other busy.
Around. Yeah.
The earlier ones were every couple years. And then, the last half of them were a little bit more spread out.
Sure. Sure. But then you also had some a little bit older kids to help take care of them and chip in, which is nice.
Yep.
Built-in babysitters.
Yes.
Are awesome.
Yes. Okay. So I'm going to start with Alison. So the reason we wanted to talk about this today is because April is Child Abuse Prevention Month. Can you talk about why we set aside some time to pay attention to this?
Absolutely. The United States Conference of Catholic Bishops really encourages the safe environment offices and dioceses throughout the U.S. to allow, to pay attention in April, to promote, to pray for healing of all forms of abuse, especially child abuse in this month. Ronald Reagan in 1988 made a proclamation. Jimmy Carter made reference to it earlier, setting aside April in the secular world as Child Abuse Prevention Month. But in our Catholic diocese as well, we take it as a time to provide for healing masses. We pray novenas and rosaries together. We're praying for healing from abuse, but also just talking about these hard topics. I mean, in human life, to have that integration of our spiritual and human lives, to understand how God's created us to thrive. Let's look at ways that things that hold us back from that, living fully alive in Christ.
Right. Okay, good. So for boundaries, it might seem kind of weird that we're talking about this stuff on a Catholic show, because it's really it doesn't seem like it's Catholic, but it really is. So can you talk to us about what boundaries have to do with Catholicism and our faith?
Yeah, I was looking into the catechism. One of my favorite things to read is a catechism, like a total wonderful Catholic geek, right? But the third kind of, it has 4 different pillars or 4 different sections. And the Life in Christ section talks a lot about our own integration and what's the freedom in created as in God's image and likeness, excuse me. How are we created in his image and likeness? And how are we as individuals as well as beings who have responsibility to community and need communion and community? So how am I to be live the free will that the Lord has created me to live, and then give myself as a gift to others versus someone who might hurt or harm? So diving into that section, it's beautiful to read that God, this is in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, 1730. God created man as a rational being, conferring on him, I love this, the dignity of a person who can initiate and control his own actions. And we can get into talking about charity and how our actions can love versus take or harm. But I loved that kind of the core boundaries is that we're created in God's image. And how do I live in the solitude of myself, or like Blaise Pascal says, to be quiet in my own room, to know myself and my relationship in solitude with God, and then to know my need for others and to give myself and to receive love as well. In that communal identity of God. So talking about boundaries just says, okay, what does that look like when I say I'm made in God's image? I mean, what is it? It's boundaries is one of them, talking about how do we understand where I end and the next person begins.
Right. Okay. So when you say boundaries, what does that mean? I know there's some different types of boundaries that you're kind of referring to.
Yeah. Sometimes I like to categorize them, and Mike or Tam, if you want to hop in, I like to categorize there's exterior boundaries and interior boundaries. That's something that I kind of conjured up. I like to kind of organize things in my head, but an exterior boundary is someone can't hit me. They're not allowed to break my skin or to, push me out of the room, or they can't violate my physical integrity. And then interior boundaries, what do I feel responsible for? I'm responsible for myself and my behavior. I'm responsible for ways that I might harm others by my own words and intentions. But I also need to understand the interior boundaries of what am I responsible for in the life of others? Like, if you have a spouse or family that you live with, they're upset. Where am I responsible for contributing to the distress they're feeling, and what's not my responsibility?
Right.
So that's an interior boundary of what am I owning and what am I not. I'd love to know, though, what the Mitzels are thinking.
Yeah.
Why are boundaries Catholic? Because I think I have my understanding and the way I've zipped it in, but like, how are they Catholic? And then what are boundaries?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I really like the way you categorize those into two chunks like that. I know, looking at our family and our kids and the years of raising, just as I was processing the different types of boundaries that come up, that we've discussed, you're running stuff from physical boundaries, emotional boundaries, even time boundaries. Of course, sexual boundaries exist on different levels, age appropriate, of course, how you're talking about those, intellectual boundaries, there's all sorts of things. I like your approach there, because you can categorize those, you can dump those easily into those two categories that you had there, Alison.
And I really think that you hit on a very great talking point with your children to talk about that interior emotional boundary. If something is distressing at school or at home or wherever they are, for them to reflect honestly, what part am I responsible for and what part am I not responsible for? And I think that will really contribute to a lot of freedom as the child grows.
Yeah. And that's kind of one of those things that you had mentioned to me when we talked about this before, Alison, was sometimes we're confused, we misunderstand boundaries. So what are boundaries not? That's a weird way to ask that question, but what are they not?
So, and I love talking about boundaries in the Catholic context, because there is a misnomer that as a Christian, we should be nice and almost doormats, and like we should always say yes to others and always care for other people's needs and feel responsibility for the whole world, and burn yourself out and do one more ministry and one more thing. So sometimes that can be a confusion of a good boundary. Actually, you mentioned Father Mike Schmitz earlier, Tammy, when we were first talking, but he has a neat little segment about keeping just keeping boundaries, time boundaries, and what you're not responsible for. Yep. But often, so people think, they can often think if being Christian is this lack of boundaries, let's say, then often people will struggle with, well, if I put up a boundary, it feels like I'm putting up a wall, or I'm rejecting others. It also feels like I'm selfish.
Right.
And so boundaries are not walls, boundaries are not selfishness, and boundaries are not isolation was the other thing.
Right.
Oftentimes people struggle with boundaries because they want connection so desperately, or feel such a strong desire for that they worry any boundary is going to lose that relationship with the other person. And so there's fear there.
And really, it probably doesn't interrupt that relationship. I think it probably sets up the relationship for success, is what I would kind of see a little bit more, because the other person knows what's expected of them, and you know what is expected of you.
Absolutely.
Boundaries.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You guys want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think boundaries kind of right order our relationships, you know, and I think, you know, when you grow up Catholic, you grow up in you know, pretty much any Christian faith, really, and we're very willing to jump into that self-sacrifice, right, and that giving constantly to others, and that's beautiful things, again, within proper boundaries and context. But yeah, we do have a tendency sometimes, I think, to get ourselves into situations that we probably shouldn't, just because we're overextending. We're not being true to our own boundaries and our own self, and really that doesn't help us love ourselves very well, and it doesn't help us to love the person that God has put in front of us as good as we could.
Right. Right.
Yeah, Father Mike Schmitz made a great point to me. He said he'll have people in his parish that'll see someone in need in the parish. Someone's in need, they're sick or they're homebound, and the person wants to care for them. And he said, you need to put a good boundary. This is when I'm available and when I'm not available. And he said, because it's not being selfish. You know, they'll call you, no, this is a time I'm with my family, I'm not available. He said, it's so important because your boundary saying this is when I'm not available allows the other person to then care for you in return.
Right.
It creates something reciprocal, you know, even if you have to hold it, it allows them to realize you also have needs, or it allows you, like Mike just said, to have responsibility for you know, to give yourself to the relationships, other ones that you need, like your time for your family, or time for other friends, or time for yourself, time for the Lord in prayer,
Right.
you know?
Right.
I thought that was really thoughtful. It honors the dignity of the other person when you say no, because you have needs as well.
Yeah.
And then it makes it reciprocal and not a one-sided kind of false imbalance.
Yeah, I think that's really good to point out to people. If you just joined us, I'm talking to Alison Conemac and Mike and Tammy Mitzel about boundaries. So, Mike and Tammy, can you tell us how you have taught boundaries to your children, both directly and indirectly, and kind of over the time as they've grown? Because you've got children in a rather wide age group, so obviously you're not teaching them boundaries all the same at the same time. So, can you talk about how you've done that with your kids?
Yeah, I'm going to throw out some real practical ways, what it looked like with my little ones, you know, just showing them a physical circle, you know, like this tangible physical circle, people that are not in our family, not grandmas and grandpas, not brothers and sisters, you know, they don't need to enter that space for affection. You know, they don't need to be asking you for a hug.
Right.
And just keeping it really simple and very tangible at that age, asking them questions, you know, who is a stranger? And you just do that periodically and review that often enough that you know that it's fresh in their mind, who is a stranger. And I would differentiate, you know, the people that mom and dad talk to at church. Are they strangers? You know,
Right.
and say, yes, they are.
Yes.
Even though we talk to them, they are still strangers versus, you know, the next step of the people that come into our home.
Right. Right.
That's a different level, but they still don't need to ask you for hugs.
Right.
You know,
Right.
and lap sitting, you know, the same thing, just the grandmas and grandpas.
Yeah, you know, what she was talking about with friends and stuff too. I remember just that awareness being brought to me by one of my kids. You know, after we got home one time and they were trying to talk about my friend, you know, whoever, and I'm like, I'm not sure who you're talking about, because I'm running through the list in my head of my who I consider my close friends, right? And turns out it was this person I was talking to in the store that was just happened to be there, and we were standing in line and we were just struck up conversation, and it just reminded me how simply our little kids just view other people and relationships. It's like, I met you, you want to be my friend.
Right.
Okay, we're friends, you know? And it's like, with that comes this whole mentality of what it is to have this close friendship. And I'm like, wow, yeah, I need to differentiate some things here.
Yeah, very true.
And so, as far as, kind of how they taught us when we were children, and of course the world has changed a lot since then, but the basic thing was, don't accept a ride, even if they say, oh, your parents are in the hospital, I need to take you to them. Just very clearly saying it would always be us or it would be grandma and grandpa.
Right, right.
We'll never have anyone else sent to you.
And even, because our kids question a lot of things. They're like, well, what if grandpa and grandma aren't around? What if, this
Right.
and that? And I'm like, our kids know who our very close core family friends are. That if, there's like 3 of them, that if they showed up and said mom and dad are in trouble, it's probably true.
Right.
And they know it, because these are very close friends that have been allowed in our kind of close family circle in our home. And they've been told too that these are people that mom and dad trust in these situations, in these circumstances, if they should arise.
Right.
And so then with middle school, it's just kind of continuing that, except the conversation looks different. It's more age appropriate and it's more two-way, and, asking them, what their questions are. And keep in mind that at that age, your children are a little more independent, a little bit away from the parents more often. And again, the not accepting a ride. Also, like with bike riding, without us, I would say no one ever needs to stop and ask you for directions, so keep that.
Wow.
Keeping that physical distance, that they don't need to get anywhere near you. And if someone does slow down their car and attempt to talk to you, just ride away. So I thought that was a really practical thing. And then in high school,
well, now you have a whole different thing going on in high school, don't you?
Yeah, because then it starts crossing, with gender relationships, friends that are of the opposite gender, and also the dating thing. But we're not, getting into that right now. But just talking about appropriate affection, continuing this same thing that, the ones that come into your circle, have to have that different type of attitude. And
yeah, and I just want to jump in too. I think, the importance, I think we always, in the business of our lives, we tend to think that we don't need to address these things, or maybe they're too young to address these things. And, but it doesn't stop us from teaching our kids about everything else, right? And we're willing to put things on the level of our little toddlers, of our grade schoolers, of our middle schoolers, high schoolers, and we'll teach them anything else at an age appropriate level. And this kind of stuff, we just kind of, I see so many people that just kind of not want to broach that subject. But if you start when they're little, and again, we talk about boundaries. This is setting up an appropriate boundary in your home, right? It's this boundary that says these are safe things that we talk about. We discuss this openly in our home, and there's never any shame. There's never any worry or concern. Nobody's going to look at you differently. You just come to me and say, what is this about? Or this is what happened. And then we're going to talk about that, and we're going to sort it out. And so it's building that trust in that conversation, that trust that, okay, mom and dad are not just loving me in mom and dad ways, but they're really looking out for the totality of my care and my safety and my joy and my happiness. And they're willing to go to any extent to make sure that I'm safe in that way.
Right, right.
That's incredible and I just want to identify, it is so incredible. When you talked about this is a safe topic for us to have in our home and to talk about openly, but that even presupposes that you, Mike, and Tammy have thought through and have thoughts about boundaries and your own boundaries, and that what can be taboo or uncomfortable conversations are things that are worth stepping into and up to for your children. And so they can come and talk to you about things because you don't get all worked up or get all anxious or say, no, that's not something we like to address. Like, you've addressed that within yourself. And I think that's even like one of the first steps for each individual. That's just even like an action item today. Like, what do I think about my boundaries, and how do I feel about communicating difficult things with people that I love, whether it's my children or my spouse or my friend? Can I have those conversations that some people call hard, but once you address it within yourself and the solitude of yourself and with the Lord in prayer, with trusted mentors or advisors, to be able to step into that conversation, it's not as scary. It's not as hard as we might make it out to be.
Right.
So it just fills me with so much hope and excitement and gratitude to hear parents who have worked in that themselves and then can say this is a safe topic to have in our home.
Right.
That the being that you are towards your children in that is it goes without good. I mean, I can't applaud that enough.
Yeah.
So I just love hearing that, Mike and Tammy. That's so
Yeah.
awesome.
We only have about a minute left. So Mike and Tammy, obviously, I assume you have seen a difference in how your kids respond in situations as opposed to maybe how you've seen other families or children respond. Is that right?
Yeah, I think one thing I've really tried to teach my kids with all this, both of us have, is it's not a mindset of living in fear of,
No
oh,
fear.
something's going to happen. What's going to happen? I got to distrust everybody. It's not that. It's just growing in that situational awareness.
Good.
It's growing in, who is in my space right now? What is the environment I'm in? What's the context of the environment I'm in? And do I feel okay? And if at any point I'm feeling this little thing churning inside of me that says something seems off, then let's just default to something's probably off,
Right.
and then just take action at that point.
Yeah, you should
And that
absolutely pay
served
attention to that kind of thing.
Yeah, and that served our kids well. And we had one of our children that actually ended up in a situation that way where an individual in the community was trying to get them to come with them, and he took the appropriate steps, came and talked to us right away. We talked to local law enforcement, and they ran through the gamut, and they responded quickly and immediately. Thank God nothing happened.
Right.
But nothing happened because we had been talking to our children since they were little. He knew what to do and he knew how to respond.
Yeah. Yeah. So important. All right. Unfortunately, that 20 minutes went super fast, which it always does.
Big topics.
I know we could talk about
Yeah.
this for a long time. I really appreciate, Mike and Tammy, that you came on to talk about what you guys have done. I think this will really help other parents to understand maybe how they might need to adjust, or if maybe they're doing everything right, and maybe encourage them to look more into, hey, how should I talk to my kids about this stuff? So thank you very much for coming and doing that.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, you're welcome. And Alison, thank you for all the work you do for Safe Environment. It's so important. And I know there's going to be some things coming up for this month, right?
That's right. That's
The
right.
rosary
Yep, there'll be a rosary, so watch for that on the YouTube channel and watch for that on
social media. Yep.
Social media. There's also a mass praying for those who have been affected by abuse. It's the 30th, the last Saturday evening. Here at the cathedral, all are welcome. It's the 4 p.m. vigil mass. It'll also be the televised mass on that Sunday.
Oh, okay, right. That's right. So we'll be getting information out for those things. So do keep an eye on our social media and probably the website, sfcatholic.org.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All right. That is it for us today. Hope you'll join us again next week for more Catholic Views.